Do you ever feel like your business is one surprise away from chaos and you're not sure which surprise it'll be? You're not alone. Hi, I'm Justin with the Thoughtful Beard, your home for insights, ideas, and a scally cap. And today we're back to demystify risk in plain English. Let's start simple. What is risk? Well, let me answer that with the most straightforward definition you'll ever hear. Risk is anything that can stop you from hitting your goals. Contrary to popular belief, this is not just a cybersecurity thing. Risks are not just hackers. They're vendors slipping, the power going out, cash flow tightening, a lawsuit, an employee resigning, or even a thunderstorm. If it can derail your plan, it's a risk. So how do you deal with risks without turning the whole company into paperwork and paralysis by analysis? Let's get into it. The answer is with culture. Establishing a few habits that everyone and anyone in your organization can practice. Habit 1, spot it early. When something worries you, say it. Habit 2, say it simply and without jargon. Come up with one sentence that communicates both what you're worried about and why it matters. And habit 3, act small often. Tiny improvements beat perfect plans that never launch. So now that we have a foundation for building a culture that recognizes risks and takes small steps to prevent those threats, let's move on to the next definition that we need to understand. What is a risk assessment? In the same spirit of straightforwardness as the last definition, I would answer that a risk assessment is simply a way to quantitatively compare risks so you can choose which risks to tackle first. Let's unpack that definition so we can figure out if and how we may need to evolve our culture. First, let's look at the phrase quantitatively compare. This tells us two important requirements for a risk assessment. First, we need more than one risk. And two, we need some way to assign a number to each of the risks so that there's something to actually compare. So let's talk about risk score. The simplest way to assign a score to a task is to answer two simple questions. What is the likelihood of this threat to my goals actually happening? And what would the impact be if it actually happened? Keep it basic. Use a 1 to 5 scale for each answer. For likelihood, 1 is rare or unlikely to occur, whereas 5 is common or extremely likely to occur. For impact, 1 is annoying, and 5 is a death sentence to my goal. Now multiply those two numbers, and you have a score for your risk that you can compare to other risks. See how easy that is? So let's incorporate these new concepts of we need more than one risk to compare, and we need a number to compare against into our habits. First, if you remember, we originally had spot it early. When something worries you, say it. Let's change that habit to spot it early. When something worries you, write it down. This now allows us to keep a running register of each of the risks that worry you, so we can compare them later. Second, we previously said say it simply without jargon. Come up with one sentence that communicates both what you're worried about and why it matters. Again, let's change that habit to write it simply without jargon. We'll talk a little bit more about this one in a minute. But before we do, let's insert a new habit. Our new third habit is assess using a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the best case and 5 being the worst case, both the likelihood of your concern coming true and the impact if it does. Our last habit from earlier was to act small often. Tiny improvements beat perfect plans that never launch. We'll leave that one as is for now. So now let's return to write it simply without jargon. Come up with one sentence that communicates both what you're worried about and why it matters. To set the stage, I want to define one more important term that you will need to understand to fully grasp where this lesson is headed, and that's a risk register. A risk register is simply the single document that becomes the authoritative system of record for documenting, comparing, prioritizing, acting on, and reassessing all of your risks. We'll go into greater depth on actually creating and best practices for managing a risk register in the next video. But it's still an important concept to understand because that's ultimately where all these habits come together in physical form. Now, why go on a tangent about a document while talking about writing something simply? Great question. Let me explain why. To ensure that your sentence is simple, yet effective and compatible with the future steps in the process, it needs to encompass three elements. The what that is in risk. I refer to these as your crown jewels. These are the stuff that your business truly relies on. The people in key roles or have all the know-how, critical data that your business relies on to succeed, key systems and locations, and valuable vendors. These aren't everyone and everything. Remember, risks are threats to hitting your goals. That means your what needs to be something that is imperative to hitting your goals. Secondly is the how your crown jewel may be at risk. I refer to this as your ouch. Envision 1 to 2 ouch scenarios for each crown jewel and write them down. Keep them human and relatable. Remember, you're going to eventually be building a risk register that others will read and need to understand. Examples might be our star sales rep leaves with key accounts, or a single source supplier goes out of business, or a spreadsheet with customer orders gets deleted. Something someone else can easily read and get the same pit in their stomach as you did when you wrote it. And thirdly, the why the risk is a threat to your goals. I refer to this as the pain. This is the outcome you envision if the ouch scenario actually occurred to your crown jewel. Remember, you'll have to answer the two key questions when you're done defining your risk. What is the likelihood of it happening, and what's the impact? The more straightforward you can make it up front to answer those questions, the more reliable your risk register becomes. For example, if you have a key customer that represents 60% of your annual recurring revenue, then you might write a risk entry as Customer X having a turnover in management and canceling their contract with us, resulting in a loss of 60% of our ARR. Now, when you assign the impact score, it's not purely subjective. It's a subjective analysis of objective facts. Maybe you can survive a loss of 60% of ARR if you have huge margins, but most likely your current goals will be put on hold. So it's definitely going to be in the 5 range. Okay, so now we come to our last habit. Act small often. Tiny improvements beat perfect plans that never launch. Here's where I would imagine that you're thinking, how am I supposed to act on these? I'm just one person coming up with the things I think would jeopardize our goals. I don't even know if they're all real, let alone have any power to fix them. If that is what you're thinking, congratulations, you're right. If it's not what you're thinking, congratulations on being part of the minority of business owners that recognize the value of identifying and prioritizing risk. Regardless, the concern is a valid one. And to deal with it, we need to now insert 2 more habits into our risk-first culture. The first is involve others. The second is assign an owner. To be clear, the involve others should have been implied from the beginning. By definition, the word culture can only be used when it applies to a group or organization. Habits are consistent, repetitive behaviors of an individual that, when applied to multiple individuals, creates a culture. If you're the only one in your group that is concerned about threats to the group's goals, you'll have a very difficult time mitigating them. Also, it's really the only way to see the big picture of threats. Operations sees supplier delays, finance sees cash flow crunch, HR sees turnover risk, while support hears customer frustration. Security sees the cyber threats. Everyone should have the same goals, but have different risks. So let's get everyone a common language to interact with. With respect to assigning an owner, it needs to be clear who is going to be held accountable for doing everything in his or her power to ensure that the threat to the goal or goals does not become reality. Prior to this exercise, no one may even have been aware that the threat existed. But now you know, and you have to act if the threat is significant and probable. Have you ever worked on a group project before and a critical task didn't get done because everyone thought someone else was working on it? Yeah, you can't afford that here. Assigning an owner is critical to the culture, and it does two things. First, it informs everyone who is accountable for mitigating the risk. And two, it empowers the owner to be the single cook in the kitchen, even when everyone else has opinions on how it should be done. Now, one important question I've been asked before about this habit is, who should the owner be? Does it need to be someone at the executive level? Which I think is a fantastic question, and one I answer with a resounding no. But the owner of a risk should be anyone in the organization that has the power, skills, know-how, or influence to mitigate the risk, regardless of title or position. The but part of my answer, though, is but the executives must be on board. A risk-first culture cannot succeed if it is a bottom-up grassroots initiative. In many cases, the tasks to mitigate high-priority risks require time, money, capacity, or any number of distractions from normal day-to-day business. If the top brass is not on board with the criticality of addressing high-impact, high-likelihood risks, risk owners will find themselves unable to complete their task, and the effort is doomed from the start. So to wrap up, we now have a pretty solid list of habits that will eventually become a culture. They currently are: habit 1, spot it early. When something worries you, write it down. Habit 2, write it simply, without jargon. Come up with one sentence that communicates both what you're worried about and why it matters, making sure it encompasses the what, how, and why, or crown jewel, ouch scenario, and pain. Habit 3, assess, using a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the best case and 5 being the worst case, both the likelihood of your concern coming true and the impact that it does. Habit 4, involve others. Habit 5, assign an owner. And habit 6, act small often. Tiny improvements beat perfect plans that never launch. In the next video, we will dig into the risk register in greater detail and focus on not only how to build it, but how to use it both to act now and continuously improve. If you found this helpful, please like, subscribe, and be sure to share it with anyone you know is overwhelmed when they hear the phrase risk assessment. Until next time, this is Justin with the Thoughtful Beard, your home for insights, ideas, and a Scally Cat.